To our first episode of DFW Sports United in Action, a roadmap for change. My name is Carla Rosenberg and I'm president of DISE. We are so proud to collaborate with WISE and BSP to launch this 4-part series to equip and evangelize DFW sport and entertainment professionals for action, personally, organizationally, and in the community. As 3 equally yoked groups reflective of the industry as a whole that recognize the opportunity and need to affect change. These virtual events are free and open to everyone in the sports and entertainment community in DFW and beyond, and will take place every 2 weeks on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, with future events on September 30th, October 14th, and October 28th. So please mark your calendars and spread the word. I would now like to invite Katie Wagner, President of WISE DFW, to say a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Carla. This webinar series is more than just the events themselves. It's about taking action. And our 3 organizations have created an action plan to be part of the series that will give you the tools to continue the work and conversation after today. The 4 focus areas of action are education, employee or organization, personal, and community. During the event, we will provide you with the list of action items pertaining to today's topic. We hope you will join us and be united in action. Now I would like to hand it over to Larry Lundy, President of BSP North Texas, to introduce our featured speaker and moderator.
Thank you, Katie. Before we introduce our speakers and panelists, we want to talk about how important this is, because I'm pretty sure all of you have heard about slogans and statements. And quite frankly, our group was a little tired of more talk and we wanted more action. So we're really honored to be a part of this and to make actions speak louder than words. So what you're going to hear after our presentation is some things you can do, real tangible actions, you can make a difference. Some of this, even planning it with 3 different groups, was a little uncomfortable, but uncomfortable can be fun and necessary to make change. And there can be nobody better to make positive change and making people feel uncomfortable than Reggie Williams. So we'll get a little bit into that today. But before that, I'd like to introduce our interviewer, our keynote MC today. His name is Jarrett Bell. Jarrett grew up in Detroit, Michigan, worked with the Detroit Red Wings as a equipment manager before turning into Michigan State Spartan and coming down here to Dallas, actually, where he honed his skills at KNOK and Dallas Times Hero before working at the Dallas Cowboy Weekly. What's special about Gerald in that time is Jarrett actually worked for the Tom Landry era as well as the Jimmy Johnson era. And everybody didn't make that switch to the Jones family. So for that, Jarrett is a true survivor. But more importantly, he's a Hall of Fame voter, USA Today award-winning columnist, and he's covered every significant change in the NFL in the next 30 years. More importantly, he also is the author of the book, Resilient by Nature, that is featuring Reggie Williams' story. So with that, Jarrett, we look forward to you interviewing Reggie, and all of your Hall of Fame voters can hit Jarrett in the chat. And if you need some Cowboys that are in there, he's the one to talk to. Now, as we get to Reggie Williams, our featured panelist, the reason why he's with us today is that he's always been a proponent of change and making a difference and making you feel uncomfortable. I can attest to that. Growing up in Flint, Michigan, he had a hearing disability, but he overcame that hearing disability to go on to Dartmouth College, lead the team. In fact, he was a mentor to Russell Wilson's dad of the Seattle Seahawks, and he was drafted in the 3rd round by the Cincinnati Bengals. During his 14-year NFL career, that's right, 14 years, he had been an amazing player on the field, but more importantly, he made a difference off the field. He was a city councilman during his playing days, played in 2 Super Bowls during this time too. Didn't win one. He can talk a little bit about that, when it's talking about being uncomfortable and change. But more importantly, he came on to make a difference off the field. He was hired by the NFL during times of social injustice and unrest, just like today, to create the youth education town that made a difference in the communities when the Super Bowl came into town. And from that work, Disney saw that and actually recruited him to be the first one to launch Disney's sports business, Disney's Wide World of Sports. Many of you know that now as the Bubble, but at that time, Reggie made a lot of people uncomfortable there. He was the first one to ban Mickey Mouse from a Disney business because he wanted to prove that sports was real and authentic. Kids would cry. They would know the agony of defeat. Their bones would be broken, but at the end of the day, they could still go to the happiest place on earth. So to understand how we can understand how to make a real difference, how to make a change from this NFL Man of the Year and this award-winning columnist, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jarrett. Take care.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Larry. It really is an honor to be here. And I think it's pretty cool to have three distinct organizations collaborating on this project for change. And I think it's a great example of what we need in our society, what we need with all of us, individually, collectively, organizationally. So more power to all three organizations. Honored to be here, as I mentioned, and we have a great guest in Reggie Williams, who has exemplified, as Larry mentioned, the whole idea of promoting positive change and doing something about it. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to do about it. It's also significant in that we're at this point now on the sports timeline historically where we've had another evolution. You can go back to the late 60s and the early 70s and think about sports in that context and how it affected change or attempted to affect change in other ways. And we've seen the same thing happen now. Covering the NFL, as you mentioned, Larry, I've seen a lot of different things over the years, but one thing that haven't seen much of until the past couple of years, and even more so now, is the fact that players are using their platforms, they're involving their teams are supporting them after a bit of resistance, if you will. Colin Kaepernick still doesn't have a job. So you say all that in the context of the NFL has made movement, but there's other places to go. But with that, we'll talk about a man who knows the NFL inside and out in Reggie Williams. And Reggie, it was great to collaborate with you on your memoir, Resilient by Nature. We'll touch on some of those things as we go on here. But I guess the first thing to kind of open it up with you is if you could think about the arc of your life and go back to Flint, Michigan, when you were just a tyke and having all of the visions and the dreams of where you wanted to go and learning from your mother and father, Eli and Julia Williams, certain principles that carried with you, that stayed with you throughout the years. How are you struck by how you've been able to promote change as you've gone through your wonderful career?
Well, you know, it's a great place to start with my parents, and thank you everyone for joining us today on this very important subject matter. You know, one of the most important lessons that I learned from my mother was choosing heroes appropriately. My first hero was Thurgood Marshall, and it was primarily because of the board versus
Brown
decision. And that decision in 1954 was the same year that I was born. And so my mother always expressed that education would be such a key to my success. And my father, you know, who had such a principled life, one of his great adages was learn from the mistakes of others because you won't live long enough to make them all yourself. And that was good advice. And one of the worst things that happened in our household was the character issue of honesty. And I tell you, you did not want to lie in our household. You would get spankings for lying. And in this time, it's amazing that we have a president that lies so much. I mean, wouldn't you like to see someone's mother go out and give Donald Trump a spanking every time he lies?
Yeah, well put, Reggie. There would be a whole lot of spanking going on for sure. Before we go on, let me just say that's an amazing shirt you're wearing today.
It is. Thank you very much. I appreciate Robert Graham.
Yeah, I know it's a customized look and it looks great on you. And you've got the Ernie Barnes artwork in the background, and we talk about it in the book. Ernie Barnes is a guy who promoted change as well, a football player who became even more renowned as an artist. So I know that means something to you for sure.
Absolutely. Ernie Barnes was a great friend, and he was so impactful for me. He was obviously the artist that Norman Lear discovered to Open and Close, Good Times, and he was the artist supposedly behind JJ, a character that I really didn't like, Kid Dynamite, because he was so silly and crazy. And I was trying to be, you know, academically oriented, doing all the right things in the community, not being a cut up in the class. And JJ was everything but that. But Ernie Barnes was such an enormous heart and soul who put on the canvas what all of African Americans felt, you know, in the movement and elongation and expression of our reach collectively into, you know, a country that didn't embrace us, but by our reaching out and creating so much athletic and artistic talent, America is a better place because of people like Ernie Barnes.
Reggie, I want to circle back for a minute in talking about your upbringing in Flint, because one of the things that you told me about when we were collaborating on your memoir was the fact that your father would take you and your brothers to marches, to protests in the city when certain issues came up, and your father was pretty politically active. Can you reflect on that a little bit for us?
Yes, it was a very, you know, turbulent times in Flint, Michigan, as you know, being from Detroit. When I was growing up, we lived on the north side of Flint, which was an all-Black neighborhood. There were certain sections of Flint that you had to have a Muhammad Speaks newspaper as access through certain points of entry into certain neighborhoods. But certainly, my father, you know, was willing to work twice as hard, and he got his high school degree, as did my mother, while they were raising us. And so in his case, action spoke louder than words. And it was because of him getting a third job that I was able to even afford to go to Dartmouth College, because Bo Schembechler, who was the head coach of Michigan, had told me I wasn't good enough, even though I had done everything since I started school to get all straight A's, do great on the SAT, ACT, accomplish everything you want to accomplish, and then someone takes your dream away. And my father was willing to go through the extra cost to allow me to pursue a great education that also turned out to be a great stepping stone to an NFL career.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And speaking of stepping stones, let's talk about Dartmouth for a minute, because one of the things you told me about Flint and the protests that your father would take you on, I mean, you guys would come back to the church and assemble and listen to speeches. And so it was ingrained in you, that civic pride and that Black pride, if you will. But also you go to Dartmouth, and, you know, all due respect, I mean, great from an academic standpoint, I could not have gotten into Dartmouth, okay? So let's admit that right off the bat. But I'm curious as to how much of a culture shock was that transition for you from Flint to Dartmouth?
Well, you know, we talk about it in the book. You know, it was a tremendous culture shock. When I went to Dartmouth, I didn't know anyone at all. No one from Flint went to Dartmouth. No one that I was friends with were talking about, hey, should we go to Dartmouth and I'll meet you there? And on my very first day, I ran into a cultural phenomenon where I saw all of the white kids walk across the street, and the cars would stop for them. And then the first time I walk across the street, I get hit by a car. And it wasn't but hours later that I'm in the locker room when several players, white players, refused where their lockers were assigned because it was near a Black player, and they weren't gonna shower with the Black player. And all of this took place in my first 24 hours at Dartmouth. I felt so estranged. But my freshman head coach, Jarrett Bell, did something very special that day in terms of change. He took control of the situation after hearing from the trainer that these white players had a problem with this particular Black player. And because Jarrett Bell also knew that beyond playing football, I was a good wrestler. I had placed in the state of Michigan as a heavyweight. And so he knew I had leadership skills. But I had never been a captain before, but he made me a captain on that very first day. I had to learn calisthenics for the first time spontaneity. But that taught a lesson to all of these white students, many of whom are doctors and lawyers and judges all across America, including one of my classmates, John Carney, is the current governor of Delaware. But they all of a sudden had to appreciate respect for a Black person that they never had to before. I was the first freshman African-American captain on the football team ever. And so young people coming from all over America all of a sudden looked to me for leadership. And it was important for me also to reach out to them to be their leader. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn a lot of skills about race relationships and listening and understanding and trying to have an articulate story that would force them to listen to what I had to say. But one of the greatest legacies that I do feel that I left to Dartmouth beyond the football that I played was that I was a member of the very first class of Alpha Phi Alpha, the Theta Zeta chapter, on Dartmouth College captain in 1973. Before that, there had never been any kind of African-American organized effort at all. And that organization still exists almost half a century later, has graduated hundreds and hundreds of African-American men, and has spawned the AKA chapter, then there's a Delta chapter on Dartmouth College. But there's a sense of family that really didn't exist for African-Americans in such a lily white places, New Hampshire and Vermont.
You know, it's interesting, you mentioned the culture and, you know, just in that college environment. And I think back to that time, and it's the early 70s, and you had a lot of movements going on, political movements, if you will, on campuses all across the country. Now, I know when you first got to Dartmouth, that very first year was the first year that women were admitted to school. And you talk about, you know, the racial issues that may have existed and just kind of how all of that pollination, if you will, took place. Can you reflect on any part of that overall college experience, politically speaking, that impacted you moving forward?
Well, you know, one of the other unique things that you're talking about, yes, my freshman year was the first year that Dartmouth admitted women, fortunately. Now women are the majority of students that have enhanced the academic prosperity of the college community. But for me, a big part of what I took away from Dartmouth was that we all have an individual opportunity to try to make a difference. And one of the things that really was important for me in terms of change, which impacted me, which I never would have thought I would have ever done, was that I took ballet at Dartmouth. Something that, you know, I normally wouldn't do, but my flexibility throughout my life not only enhanced my NFL football career, but through the 23 knee operations and now hip replacements, my ability to walk unaided, you know, with crutches, will all go back to the unique skills, you know, I learned as an athlete, learning the skill sets necessary to be in ballet.
Yeah, and no doubt it helped because you played 14 years in the NFL, started on 2 Super Bowl teams, but in the context of this conversation, one of the, you know, it's a resume just full of accomplishments, NFL Man of the Year included for your off the field endeavors. And so that's important. But when I think about the fact that during your career, towards the latter stages of your career, you were actually a member of Cincinnati's city council, it just boggles my mind. And Reggie, you know, as we were researching the book and working on it, we tried to find out if there was a precedent. There have been many athletes who have gone on to serve in public office. Steve Largent, Hall of Fame receiver, comes to mind. J.C. Watt's another one that comes to mind, but they went into office after their careers were over. You were right in the midst of a career helping a team go to the Super Bowl and you're leaving practice. And I'll never forget Anthony Munoz telling me, your Hall of Fame teammate with the Bengals, how impressed he was with your time management, because you may, leave on a lunch break to go to City Hall to handle some business and then come back. Why would you do that? What was the motivation for you while you're in that intense environment as a pro athlete to take on the responsibility to serve the citizens while you were playing?
Well, as Larry mentioned, I was born here in Impaired, and that had a profound impact on my life. Going to public schools in Flint, Michigan, but also having to concurrently go to Michigan School for the Deaf. And in that respect, know that I'm unable to articulate the sounds that I'm not hearing. If you don't hear sounds, it's impossible for you to repeat those sounds. And so for me, and going back to the question again, because I got caught.
Just your motivation for taking on the responsibility of being on the city council while you were playing. I mean, you could have waited until you were finished playing to pursue politics, but you did it while you were in the midst of your career.
Well, I went to that story about Michigan School for the Deaf because on the very first day that I made the team, the first thing I did before I even searched for an apartment was I looked in a phone book, that's the only way you can get information then, and found the Cincinnati Speech and Hearing Center. And I drove over there and introduced myself to the executive director, and I volunteered. And so what really motivated me in being a professional athlete was the thrills that I got as a kid meeting my heroes, like Muhammad Ali, who's had such an influence on me. And so the whole time I was in Cincinnati, I did as much as I could to impact and positively be a positive role model to kids throughout my entire career. But one of the things that's probably unique about being a city councilman, and I think about Sam Weiss, our dearly loved but dearly departed head coach. He was the coach that took us to Super Bowl 23. And during that year, I was in a locker room in practice, and that was the very first time that a female reporter came into the locker room to interview me. And I had a chance to see how disrespectful my teammates were to her presence, but I was able to shield her from their animated actions. And we were able to get through our interview. And that was something that Sam Weiss allowed because I was a city councilman. In 1990, when that happened in a playoff game, he barred women from the locker room. So there has been an effort of a change by virtue of me being on the city council and the fact that I was able to bring Judge Nadine Allen to the locker room and swear me into office was really setting a tone for the culture of our locker room to respect women in the locker room.
What would you say your biggest accomplishments were as city councilman? What was your platform? What did you want? And I know you had to run for re-election as well, and you won that. What was your platform? What were your major objectives when it comes to change?
So I was a champion for kids, and I was a champion for the minority community. At my term, I was the only African-American on a 9-member city council. And so there were things that I fought very hard for that we do talk about in the book, like guns. I still don't understand why the proliferation of AK-47s and all of these military style weapons. How can kids, be so vulnerable? I remember growing up and we would have our school drills for tornadoes or for hurricanes or something like that. But I can't imagine as a child being in school now and having to do a drill for an active shooter. And so that was something. But on that issue, that became the first time that I was called the N-word. At least to my knowledge, I was called the N-word. But all of a sudden, the anger that came to me while I'm still trying to win, the championship for the Cincinnati Bengals, the anger that came to me because I was taking on issues like that. And one of the other issues that I feel proudly about was being part of getting our pension board to divest itself from all investments in South Africa. Not necessarily a Cincinnati issue, but it was a Cincinnati issue because they became the primary conduit financially for the financial survival of South Africa. And so to find out that that legislation was so impactful that we would get a phone call from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who would fly to Cincinnati, or Zinzinnati as he called it, to tell me and a group of other African Americans who were part of my leadership council that that legislation was the straw that broke the camel's back, and that Nelson Mandela would be getting out of Robbins prison, and that South Africa was planning for their very first democratic election in 1996. At that one moment in my life, it was acceptable to lose 2 Super Bowls.
Hey, Reggie, when you see all of the protests and the movement for social change in the NFL these days, how does that strike you? And would you have taken a knee during the national anthem, during the heyday of your career?
Certainly as a city councilman, I would have been standing up for the people who've been broken down. And I certainly myself have been a victim of police brutality and accostation, even as a Disney executive and as an NFL Man of the Year. I felt the cold steel of my temple from the police. And that's a story that we do tell in the book, but it's important for us now to try to come together. The more divisiveness is not going to help us to moderate change. And the change we need is people coming together like the 3 groups that are organizing this discussion that we're having today.
Yeah. There's so much we could talk to you about, obviously, with your career, but one of the great accomplishments was the career at Disney, and you touched on it. What kind of philosophies did you take to Disney? And when you think about what organizations can do for change and the culture they could develop within themselves for change, what would you tell people who are leaders of organizations now based on your experience at Disney?
Well, one of the culture thing that I talk, and Larry can speak to it because Larry was a great contributor to the success of Wide World of Sports. But I used to begin every meeting by just saying failure. And everyone in the room would say is not an option. And so we were focused in on continued success for Wide World of Sports. And really what drove that was the initial vision for this place, a place that was very authentic, where the world's best athletes went to compete like you have right now within the bubble at ESPN Wide World of Sports, phenomenal 7-game series, and soon an NBA champion will be crowned. And I think about players like Donovan Mitchell, who gave so much in his 7th game loss that he just fell on the court face first. And part of what my vision was, because I had lost 2 Super Bowls and they hurt so much, and I used to have nightmares about those Super Bowls, but I always envisioned, wouldn't it be great if you went for a championship and yet you lost, and that was so horrible, but you were still at the happiest place on earth? I thought about when I saw Donovan Mitchell laying down his face, I said, nah, maybe not. Maybe not. But it made for great marketing. And we got this place open. And I'm very, very proud that all these kids in the future are going to be playing in the same facilities as the world's best NBA players, as the world's best Major League Soccer players. And that's something that will live on forever and is, in my mind, as good and as equitable as pixie dust.
Well, okay, man. Disney, Mickey and Goofy and Minnie and all your folks there. Hey, we've got some questions from the audience here. I want to get to a few of them. The first one is from Chuck Young, and he wants to know your thoughts about young Black athletes and HBCUs. For decades now, I mean, there was a time where elite athletes could not go to Southeastern Conference or Southwest Conference schools because of racism, and had to go to HBCUs. Now they've got their choice, and frankly, the HBCUs don't get the same elite talent as the other school, as the major schools. What would be your advice to young athletes and how they might consider HBCUs versus some of these major colleges?
No, I enjoyed my Dartmouth college education, but it was nothing culturally that I would brag about. And there's a part of my collegiate experience, my education, that would have benefited from going to an HBCU. I think about Morehouse and the culture that they have, and some of their graduates in Howard and so many other places. So what my goal is that everyone is equally funded so that young athletes have equal, equitable choices, and know that they're able to get as good a quality education, which is true at an HBCU, as you can get in the Ivy League. And so, there are false positives in the comparison. Yes, the cost of an Ivy League education is such because of the demand, but the quality that you can get in terms of education and the quality you can get athletically. When I was coming out of high school, Morgan State recruited and signed one of my teammates, Van Nicholson, who went on to have a good college career. And as you mentioned, Russell Wilson, who wrote the foreword to my book, I was good friends with his father, Harry B. Wilson. He was like my little brother. And their father was the president of Norfolk State, which is an HBCU. So it is an equal and equitable, positive education for all.
Okay. Another question comes from Gary Jacobs, and he wonders, do you think that we've reached a tipping point on social injustice and systematic racism with all of the conversation and the reckoning, if you will, in America now? Do you feel like we're at a point where we're going to see true lasting change?
I see true lasting change with voting. We all need to be registered. We all need to support the process, but we need to vote and vote for change. And right now we have a president that doesn't want to see the problem. You can't solve a problem if you refuse to see the problem. And we have a systematic racism problem in America. It's been the one thing America has imported to the rest of the world with its 400 years of slavery, is that America has exported racism. Racism exists all around the world. And when I talked about me not hearing the N-word while I was a Cincinnati Bengal, I just think about soccer players in Europe, and they are subjected to fans who are making monkey sounds. And so racism is a worldwide dilemma. We need worldwide leadership. We have a president of the United States right now that reminds me more of George Wallace, who was trying to be the president in 1968. We have a problem with police brutality. There are solutions that people are willing to come to the table to talk about. And the president of the United States, whoever he or she is, should be at that table.
The next question comes from Kevin Wilson. And, he acknowledges obviously your great career in the NFL and with Disney and the city council. And Kevin asks if you could elaborate on the best ways you approached trying to make change within the organizations. And I know at Disney, having a diverse staff was definitely one of your philosophical pillars, if you will. What would you say to that question in terms of the best ways you try to approach making changes within organizations?
Well, you know, we all want to be on the right side of history. And, you know, change at Disney began on the second day that I was at Disney. And on the first day, the vice president of human resources showed me his Disney ID. And it was a blue card with a gold stripe through it. And he said, as an executive, this is going to be your ID and you'll get it tomorrow. I said, thank you. The next morning I go to get my ID and the lady there refuses to give me an ID with the gold stripe because that means I am an executive. Now, I was the very first African-American executive hired at Walt Disney World in 1993. And following that, I went to the film Traditions. And Traditions was telling the story of what made Disney great. And part of this movie had Steamboat Willie. And in that particular time, that was the first time that there was sound added to visual. And to illustrate that, they had Al Jolson singing Mammy in blackface. So the next day I complained to HR, you know, that was derogatory and that was a slur. And that forced the company to say, is he being a rabble-rouser or is he doing something for our own good? And they put together a group, unbeknownst to me, who are evaluating whether I was a fit for Disney or they need to get rid of me right away. Well, fortunately, I was saved by, of all people, Whoopi Goldberg. And what particularly happened that time, Whoopi Goldberg was dating Ted Danson. And Ted Danson went to the Hasty Pudding Awards in blackface. And there was such a public outcry against that Disney said, well, obviously Reggie is doing us a favor and we're gonna start a diversity committee. And that diversity committee was the change that Disney needed to become the #1 entertainment company in the world now because they get it all over the universe.
Okay, Rez, let's be quick here in these next couple. We got time for just a couple more here, but I wanted to get to this one from Eric, who is asking you to share your advice for people who are going through hardships related to this pandemic, and obviously thinking about your background and all the challenges you had on the field, off the field, post-career with health issues. What do you tell people who are dealing with hardships?
You know, we all need to come together and, you know, whatever your forums of communication, and I think hypothetically about, you know, the churches, the expanded families that we have to communicate within these because there are so many changes that everyone is trying to grapple with. Climate change, you know, which we haven't even talked about, but, you know, to think about the fact that our country now is being bombarded by hurricanes and wildfires and a pandemic, you know, faith and, quite honestly, an unabashed love for God is a source of strength these days. And, you know, people need to find their source of strength and reside within that. Okay.
When you think about college athletes and how much of a job it is in many ways for scholarship athletes, especially at the big time schools, how would you change the college sports / academic possibilities, if you will, in the college system?
Well, you know, I will compliment Buddy Stevens, the head coach of Dartmouth, who started several years ago with eliminating contact in practice. And he created these moving tackling dummies called MVP. that are used in places of human bodies. And that has been so successful that many other college teams are doing that, as well as pro teams. And so the concerns that a lot of people have, you know, is what are some of the costs of concussions, not only for football players, but women and playing soccer and other sports. There are consequences. So the job that you speak of playing sports in college could have lifetime consequences.
Okay.
And so that's why, you know, that infrastructure from a healthcare is so important in college.
Okay, one last question and we'll turn it back over to Larry. It's from Patrick Jackson, and he wants to know, when you talk to professional athletes now regarding social justice, what are some of the action items that you leave them with?
Well, I speak to what I've done with NFL Youth Education Town. In our communities, there are places in need, especially during this time, whether you can help financially or whether you can help with volunteering and learning about the problems and being a part of solution with many of the problems that unfortunately exist in every single community that I've lived in. And I'm sure they exist in the community that everyone on this call understands. The opportunity to make a difference begins with us individually by saying yes and meeting the challenge.
Wow, that's a great segue, Reggie, to Larry and the closing remarks as we talk about change and how to impact change and the responsibility that we all have for change. So Reggie, wonderful insight. Thank you again, as usual. Love the shirt. Love the perspective. Just, you know, keep on doing you, man. Larry, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you close this out. But it's been a good chat from my perspective.
And Jarrett, we were just getting started. I can't believe it's time has come to an end. I will say this, Jarrett, I want you to continue to be on the front edge of these Kaepernick decisions, important decisions, coaching diverse in the NFL. You're on top of every story. So thank you for continuing that work and being with us today, because tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of the NFL. And I know your phone is blowing up right now in stories you can write. So thanks for being with us. And Reggie, man, you know, many people said you look like King T'Challa, but back in the day, we had Wakanda back at Disney's Wide World of Sports. Reggie's very modest. We have the most diverse team, the most diverse vendors. And our first partnership was with South Africa, Carla Rosenberg's hometown, country. So with that, I think there's a lot of action we can do. So to wrap this up, in the chat, you're going to find specific actions you can do. And also Reggie's book, you can find it, Resilient by Nature. There's so much more in there that was not covered today. And I hope all of you, we kind of ground ourselves on, once again, this was great advice, great motivation, but what can we do personally? So thank you for joining us. 2 weeks from today, we're going to have our second webinar series on allyship. What can you do as an ally when you're in the room and when we're not out in the room? What can you do to make a difference? So thanks all for you joining. Thanks for the WISE team, DISE team, and the Black Sports Professional team for coming together to do this, and the committee that worked on it. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.